Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Charles Spinosa, who is I guess, a business consultant and author, philosopher, literary scholar, all sorts of things, and also the author of this recent book, co-author of this recent book called Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. And then you wrote, I guess, I don't know, a couple decades ago, was it, this book, Disclosing New Worlds with Hubert Dreyfus?
Yes.
Is that it? Yeah.
Hubert Dreyfus and Fernando Flores.
Yeah. Now, look, this book, I found this book to be fascinating. It's hard to classify because I think what you're trying to do is to offer up a vision of a business leader, perhaps a founder, as someone, I don't want to use the term heroic because it's distinct from heroism, but it's a vision of these business leaders as artists in a way, right? As folks who are doing something that is comparable to, I don't know, running or creating a state, running or creating some kind of magnificent work of art. I mean, you use a couple different images taken from Nietzsche, taken from Burckhardt. And I think it's a very different vision of leadership from what we typically learn in business schools, right? And the virtues that you're espousing are very different from the virtues that I think most people think is behind effective leadership. And I think it's deeply rooted in the humanities and in philosophy. And so, as somebody who, I'm not in business, but I'm sort of tangential to business, I find it a very attractive vision. And I'm wondering, first of all, why we need this kind of vision and why it isn't the norm, right? Why it isn't how we think about these leaders. Obviously, people think of Jeff Bezos, they think of Steve Jobs, and they think of them sometimes as being up there with Da Vinci and Michelangelo. But then, no, a lot of people, when they hear that, they kind of snicker and they say, "Oh, come on, that's absurd." Like, these people are just trying to get rich. So I guess the first question would be, how the heck did you get into business consulting with your background?
Okay, thank you for asking that. And by the way, thank you for the description of the book and the introduction. I run into a lot of these, and that was really just dead on where my heart lives about this book. Yes, I am claiming that business leaders, by and large, do want to make their businesses into masterpieces, can do it. Very few succeed on the large scale, but my book is to help them succeed. And what do I mean by masterpieces? Like a Da Vinci masterpiece, like the other masterpieces. Masterpieces, and Shakespeare is my main person for this. I taught Shakespeare for years. Masterpieces aren't just attractive and compelling aesthetically. Masterpieces give us a distinct new way to live that we consider a good life. They're moral masterpieces, and they're morally distinctive. Shakespeare taught us how to be autonomous subjects. Shakespeare, in his tragic period, taught us that we were living for the story of our lives. And a story of our life that we knew was worth living for was one that was worth dying for. Hence Shakespeare's tragedies, hence a new way of being, a new kind of good life, which we call the good life of modernity. And we're sort of passing it to post-modernity, so it's not that compelling anymore. But that's what Shakespeare did. He gave us something distinctive, along with people like Montaigne, Descartes, and so forth. And I'm claiming that business leaders, let's take Jeff Bezos, do give us organizations that have that distinct kind of moral order. Amazon, he was very clear. He founded it on 4 values and practices that went along with those values. And the top one was relentlessness. And that's the one that people don't like Bezos for. But he did create a relentless organization. You don't work there. If you're a manager and you don't work 60-hour weeks, you're gone. That's the minimum. Likewise, customer fanaticism, likewise frugality, at least in the early days, likewise constantly raising the bar on hires. So compare that to a Google, where you can relax and follow your dreams. The good life in Amazon is completely different from the good life, say, in Google. So that's what I am writing about in creating masterpieces. I just realized I didn't write down the question you just asked me, though. So could you ask me again?
The question was how the heck you got into consulting, but maybe
No,
we can defer that for a second.
I can back up and do it.
Okay.
If you want. So how did I get into management consulting? Well, I guess I was an offbeat graduate student. As I say, I was a graduate student at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, in English, studying from the best Shakespeareans on the planet. It was, at that time, Joel Feynman, Joel Altman, Stephen Greenblatt. And I loved Shakespeare. I managed to pay for graduate school, aside from teaching assistantships. I managed a building, and my building had lots of MBA students living in it. And they would tell me about strategy and competitive difference and how they really could look at the different kinds of scenarios that people had. And I said, this is crazy. They don't have a very rich understanding of what is possible for people to do and for the different scenarios in business. So I would love to take them to Othello and to see a man that was trying to lead a noble life and become a noble Venetian, and see Iago and just how malicious Iago was and how Iago could take Othello apart. Motiveless malignancy was what Coleridge used to describe Iago. And it is brilliant. And they would leave the play astounded. I said, now, what if you are facing a competitor like Iago? Jack Welch in GE was considered the toughest competitor in those days. Nothing compared to Iago. Iago who wants to take your business out, destroy you. And are you willing to die for your business the way Othello is? And that switch, that suddenly they saw people in a richer way. They had respect for the humanities. And so I was doing my own consulting as a building manager in Berkeley. Wrote the book on innovation that you mentioned, Disclosing New Worlds, which is innovation in business, innovation in politics, and innovation in culture. And got the job, got an offer from Fernando Flores to join his consulting company. That's what led me into consulting. But what was I doing in consulting? I was taking initially, and still am to some degree, the lessons I got from Shakespeare, modified by Heidegger. Two things. You have a defining story. What is your defining story? If you can figure out your defining story, you as a leader do two things. You're far more resilient. You can take hits far more easily because that story is what is giving your life meaning. And two, you're strategically more inventive. And the two go together. I can take a hit. I'm not giving up. What do I do now? What do I still find that's wrong in the world that I'm going to fix? That gives you your strategy. And the first place, I'll try to keep the answer short, but the first place where I got to do that in consulting was with Cemex, which was a client of Fernando Flores. Cemex it wasn't at that point the third largest cement company in the world. It was growing. Lorenzo Zambrano was the CEO, but he had taken over Cemex when it was a small Monterrey cement company in Mexico that people didn't think was going to be anything other than, at best, a national cement company in Mexico. But Lorenzo Zambrano went, I hate to say it, to Stanford. And at Stanford, I know a lot of your viewers are from UC Berkeley. But he got this at Stanford. He said, this thing that the first world does with transparency, letting shareholders know what's going on in their business so clearly, that's amazing. We just take it for granted here in the United States. But for him, it was mind-blowing. No wonder they could get debt much cheaper than anybody else on the planet. No wonder it was able to grow. No wonder they could do all this. And he determined that was his life mission, to bring financial and operational transparency back to his company and use it to grow his company and become a global powerhouse. And I can tell you stories about how he did it that would show you the resilience and the strategic risk-taking and brilliance. But my job was to explain that this was the story that he was living to his senior team, and to get his senior team really taking over that story and bringing it into their hearts. And the thing that makes it real is he was becoming transparent, but no investor really believed that he could take on Europe. And he had an opportunity to buy a company in Europe. Nobody was going to give him debt to do it, so he wrote a debt brief that mentioned if there's an attractive possibility, he could use the debt to go and buy it, but the main intention was to use it to repay previous debt. He knew at the time that he was telling what he considered a white lie. He bought the company in Spain, succeeded magnificently with the company in Spain because he really loved cement, knew how to manage cement. The investment community trashed him. Now, most other CEOs would have said, that's okay, I'm just going to live with that and grow as much as I can because I can see I can grow in Europe. He didn't do that. He said, I am going to go back and resurrect the identity I had for financial transparency. For me, that's just important as the growth. I do want to show that Mexican companies can rule the world as much as Swiss and French companies, as Holcim and Lafarge, that were the two biggest cement companies in the world. But I want to do it through financial transparency. And so he did. He spent 7 years in the wilderness rebuilding that reputation and keeping that strategy alive.
Well, and now, of course, we have the CEMEX Auditorium at Stanford, which is presumably funded by him.
Yes.
But look, when you talk about a company as a masterpiece, I think, I mean, the analogy with Burckhardt is probably, or with, I guess it was Nietzsche, you know, like the palazzos, right?
Oh, I mean, that's Nietzsche, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know whether that's quite an appropriate analogy, because when you're talking about a masterpiece, you're not talking about an object, right?
Yeah,
like,
that's right.
You know, the iPhone. And you're not even talking about sort of like a really wonderfully designed organization with a strategy, but you're talking about the creation of like a moral order, right? You're creating an organization that has a culture that offers a vision of the good life that is normative. Okay, and so that's a very, very specific type of masterpiece, right?
I want to say no, but let me give some reasons for saying no. I believe that we don't find in the world moral orders separate from aesthetic orders. First of all, I don't think Nietzsche did. I don't think Burckhardt did. It is the case that when I talk about Bezos creating a masterpiece, I am talking about the organization that he created, and basically an organization with those 4 values and a good life that says, if you want to live relentlessly, you want to work at Amazon, and you'll be able to get a good life there. Now, I believe in the early days, actually, the aesthetics of Amazon showed the frugality, showed people working hard to get their jobs better and better. I'm not sure the aesthetics still do that with the glass in domes and everything. And Bezos is not right now the CEO. But I do think it does. But let's go back to the other side of business, which is my other inspiration. The other side of business is small businesses. The small businesses that line our streets in Berkeley or in Manhattan, take Madison Avenue in my case. Those businesses have, let me just say 2. My favorite 2 there are 2 hardware stores in walking distance from my home. One hardware store, you walk into, you hear classical jazz music. You smell something that's sort of like fancy soaps, which they do have, and you can't get 10 feet into that store without having someone say, can I help you? What would you like? Now, the shelves are stocked with everything. So you do sort of need someone to help you find whatever you need, whether it's a hammer or a coffee filter. But that is one way where that owner has a sense of who his customers are, what the right way to treat customers are, what the right way to treat employees is, and so forth. Presumably what the right way to treat the owner is, and suppliers, although I don't know that side. Certainly it's very distinctive. There's another hardware store within walking distance. You walk in, you smell sort of the scent of 3-in-1 oil. I don't know if your listeners are older, but just think of an oil for watches and clocks and things like that. You see there's sawdust on the floor. There are high shelves and bladders and things. And maybe you'll see one employee stocking the shelf and another employee at the cash register. And they will help you if you ask. But pretty much, when you go into that store, you're supposed to know what you want. Completely different view of what a customer is. Completely different view of how you treat employees. Obviously, one employee is getting scored on how many customers are delighted. The other's getting scored on how efficient he or she is at getting transactions to happen, making things easy to find, getting things on shelves, and so forth. Those are two completely different visions of business, and you can see it right in the aesthetics of the place. And that, for me, that's how you bridge the aesthetics on the one hand and the culture and the values of the culture on the other. And as I say, I'm a former Shakespearean. We think of Shakespeare as this great writer of tragedies, and they are very compelling tragedies. The four main tragedies, the character is dying for the sake of his own story, and that's the nature of the good life that comes out of those tragedies. So the aesthetics and the moral, how shall I say it, the moral order that's established there come together. And I believe that that's what would happen more of the time if we did not fill our CEOs and their executive teams with frameworks, consulting frameworks like the kind I've had to give sometimes, with recipes from business schools, with VCs plans on how to scale, and so forth. The world of business right now is a world where everybody, it seems, is giving senior leaders, and even further down, the recipe for how to get ahead. And if you can do it in 4 boxes, all the better. If it's a little bit more complicated, so what? But everybody's getting recipe. And what is the objective people see? Operational excellence. People think that business leaders, in their hearts, are seeking merely operational excellence. In my experience, that is only 20% true. In my experience, business leaders have a vision of what's right, and they want to test it. And if their testing of it earns them profits, then they're sure that they're on to something that's right. And my 3 basic questions to business leaders, it starts, what always goes wrong in your company or in your industry? It can be anything from, we take advantage of our loyal customers to make new deals with new customers. It can be, I was working with a video game company. We set out to make video games that are going to be attractive across for women and for men, and for older women and men, as well as younger women and men. But as soon as we get into trouble, we go for the nastiest instincts of young men to get a game out fast that will make money. That's what always goes wrong. Working for a healthcare company, we try to make things as best as possible for our patients and dealing with their insurance companies. And yes, we will write 1 or 2 letters, but if it gets more complicated than that, it's every man for himself. And we just pull back. Most of the business leaders I run into do have a sense that there is something that just always goes wrong in their business, and they're brilliant at managing around it. That's what puts them at the top. And again, about 80%, you're able to go out and find 20% who will tell you, if we're operationally effective, there's nothing wrong here. We're earning good profits. We've done so for 4 quarters in a row. I think I can do it for another 4 quarters. Don't bother me. And that's fine. It's hard enough to do that. I'm not saying it's not hard. I give those people credit, but that's not what most business leaders I run into are interested in. So my 3 questions are: what always goes wrong here? That tends to be an easy question for 80% of them to answer. What would you love to do instead? That's the hard question. That's the one you think is easy, but what would you love to do instead? That's hard because these men and women are geniuses at managing around what always goes wrong. They've been rewarded for managing around it, and they are good at it. And then once we can get what would you love, what risks do you need to take to do what you would love? And that's where we begin to work out the kinds of risks, the hard risks they're going to take, because when they make these changes, if they don't succeed, they're going to be seen as not just foolish, but actually evil. They've gone out and harmed people and careers and so forth. So we've got to figure out those, and then we have to put them in a kind of strategic order. But that's in short my masterpiece building strategy, and the reason why I do it is because I find that most people in business want to do that. They want to create an organization that is distinctive morally, and I didn't explain this well, and the aesthetics will, the way it looks, the way it feels to people, the practices they use to get everybody doing this, that look and feel will come with it. So yeah, it has a kind of look and feel. And that's what Nietzsche meant. The passage that I quote and that you were referring to was Nietzsche talking about the palaces in Genoa. And he said, these palaces in Genoa, what do you see when you see these beautiful palaces in Genoa? I'm sorry, I can't just put some up on the screen for your readers. It's very easy to Google them and see the palaces in Genoa. They are amazing. But what do you see? You see the desire for wealth. You see the desire for conquest. You see the infinite passion of the owner. You see that he wants to bring the world into the locality. Those are all moral attributes more than aesthetic ones. But when Nietzsche looks, he sees them wedded to the aesthetics. And I think when you do look at the palaces, they're very orderly, by the way. They don't look wild, but they do look capacious. They do look big, and they do look like you can see that kind of desire in them, I think. I invite you all to do it.
Well, look, I mean, in this example that you gave of the 2 hardware stores, I mean, this is something that anybody who takes, say, a business strategy course would understand as differentiation, right? In fact, strategy is all about, right, figuring out how you can be different from your competitors or from other companies, either in terms of the products you're offering or the work environment that you're offering or whatever. And I'm wondering, I mean, this seems distinctly postmodern in the sense that, before the kind of postmodern period, the goal was to figure out what virtues one should pursue and what constitutes the good life. And there's lots of disagreement about what the good life was, but everybody agreed that there was this one good life, right? that if you could just figure out what it was, then everybody would want to pursue it. And I think that whole notion is like, no one really holds to that notion anymore, that there's a single good life for all of us, right? And so, I mean, is this notion of freewheeling capitalist competition between all these different masterpieces, I mean, is this distinctively postmodern?
Absolutely. That is one of the contributions that I want the book to offer. In fact, you said one of your initial questions was, why do you think of business as full of masterpieces, and why is that a good thing? So yes, first of all, I do see the Googles and the Amazons, the 2 different hardware stores, as offering 2 distinctive views of what the good life is. And my general argument, although I have people trying to persuade me otherwise, is I can admire both of those hardware stores. I can admire Google and I can admire Amazon. A lot of people can't. I've had people walk out of me when I say that about Amazon. But choose another company. Choose The Body Shop. Choose Zuckerberg's company, Meta. Quite different from Amazon. Again, if we can admire different companies, we don't have to embrace everything we can admire. And that gives us a sense of different good lives that we can admire. And I want that to be the virtue that we develop, which is a step above tolerance. I mean, really with tolerance, which is the modern virtue for dealing with difference, we tolerate things that are different that we can't eliminate. They're too powerful. We don't consider them quite as good. We tolerate them, but it's never a happy tolerance. I think in the postmodern age, if we bring together the aesthetics with the moral order, we will see these various organizations that we can admire. And I do think of it as postmodern. I think really, too, why is it deep down deep postmodern? Well, I think postmodernity is about some loss of meaning. We don't live in a world where there are fundamental meanings anymore, or communities that bind us and hold us together. There's much less resonance in life. We are in a world right now, a postmodern world, where moments that wow us, that's what we live for. We're not all TikTok enthusiasts, but we've all been a little bit touched by the world in which TikTok can thrive. And it's a world of wonder, and it's a world, as I say, of admiration. And in that world, I want businesses to be admirable. And so we have a multiplicity of businesses, and it is quite postmodern, yes.
Well, the other thing, I mean, in addition to there being all of these different competing visions of the good life, it's not like you pick one and you stick with it for your whole life, right? It's not like, okay, I'm going to be a Christian and I'm going to stay that way. I mean, people work at Google and then they leave and they go and work at Meta and then they leave and they go work at Facebook. And, while they're an employee of Google, they may be a customer of Apple. And so in a way, they're partaking in, multiple visions of the good life simultaneously. I mean, how is that even possible?
For me, in our world today, we embrace one that is most us for the current time, and we admire the others. And we can easily deal with the others that we admire. And there still is obviously some room for tolerance. There's some that we don't admire that we just have to deal with anyway, and so we tolerate those. But the two main virtues for me are embracing. That's the one where I'm throwing most of my time in. That's where I'm the employee. That's where I'm giving most of my life. And the others that I admire and can take part in. I don't know if you're saying that. I don't think that that's that hard. I know that some people are arguing and saying, Charles, I can embrace something, but it's very hard for me to admire anything but what I'm embracing. And so if I'm embracing this political view or this political policy, at best I can tolerate others. I can't admire them. I don't know exactly how to answer that. And that might be another book if I could figure out how to answer. To me, I say, well, I don't know why your reach of admiration is so narrow. I can admire Shakespeare and I can admire Pynchon. I don't know what keeps people so narrow that way. So I don't have a good answer.
Maybe you can elaborate a little more on this idea that an enterprise is like a moral order, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't think that, if you interview most leaders, they're not going to say, "Oh yeah, I'm building a moral order here," right? I mean, they may know something about corporate culture, and they may know that corporate culture has certain imperatives and thou shalts and so forth, but I don't think that they think of themselves. They think of themselves as creating processes. Maybe they think of themselves as creating some norms maybe, but I don't think they think of themselves as building a moral order. What value comes from making that explicit, from being aware that that's really what you're doing when you're building an enterprise?
Two things. Well, actually, two things come to mind offhand. I think there are probably many more than two things, so I don't want to get people distracted. And I want to preface this by saying, I think this is where consultants and business schools have done a real disservice to businesses. And all the advisors that say your culture is made up of a set of values that you select and choose, and then you publish and you tell everybody that these are the values that they're living up to. And they're
Yeah.
usually values to look good, that are going to look good on corporate statements. One of the things to notice is anytime you see a set of values for a company and they're all consistent and you don't see any disharmony between them, that's not how human life is. That's not how we live. All just begin to distrust those values. The fact of the matter is, when I talk to managers and the problems they have managing their senior teams or any team, they do have an implicit moral order. How much do I stretch people? Who do I tell that I feel comfortable stretching? Who do I feel uncomfortable stretching? Why is it? Is that discomfort okay? Or is it not okay? Do I want people working furiously in my business? Do I want them leading balanced lives? Do I want them something in between? Do I want them pursuing dreams? Or do I want to have a certain percentage of dreamers, a certain percent of relentless operational people, and other people living balanced? Those are all choices that they make. And those are choices that they are building implicitly a moral order, but they do it behind their backs because they're told not to think about the moral order. They're told to think about the set of processes they're putting together. But in my experience, it's quite simple. We have the gender things. Why is it you're stretching men and not women? Oh, I didn't really think about that. I'm going to try to stretch these women candidates. In fact, I just had someone yesterday where I said that a year ago he started stretching women, and now I'm coaching him and some of the women. And one of the women just wrote me last night and said, I think, I can't name names, I think my CEO thinks I'm an outrageous, crazy, such and such and such and such. But he is now stretching women, and he's stretching women to be brilliant in a way that he wants them to be brilliant. And it's very interesting to see it happening. He is creating a moral order. He calls it a culture of brilliance. And he is working on it. He's working on it, I would say, pretty consciously. So the answer is, leaders do make these decisions. They tend to make them piecemeal. They're told to defend all their decisions in terms of operational effectiveness. They're told that really they need to be consistent in the way they describe their company. So if I, in fact, do want 50% relentlessness, 50% dreamers, I don't say that. I say I've got a brilliant blend of dreamers and relentlessness in my company. That's fortunate. I got they put it in other terms, but Gregory, they do make these moral judgments. What my book does and what brings it out is they're able to do it with much more intentionality, much more care, and much less obfuscation.
Yeah, and it seems to me like most leaders aren't even aware of the moral imperatives that the people who work there experience, right? So, there are going to be rewards and punishments. There's going to be encouragements and discouragements, and they usually don't match what the explicit commandments are, right? So an organization will be, take risks, and then anybody who takes risks get fired. Why is it that leaders aren't kind of compelled or forced to acknowledge what the implied culture is saying? I mean, is it because they lack anthropological capabilities? Is it because they, as you say, aren't even aware that that is what they're supposed to be doing? Why is there this kind of ignorance or mismatch?
You're asking a really profound question. And it's profound. It's as profound as what is postmodernity. Let me start by saying leaders are taught, like most of us are taught, to be herd animals. And so they adopt the values and the claims of the herd, and in their case, of the operational excellence herd.
And this is the herd, to be clear, this is like the herd of their peers.
Yes.
Right.
There's some such as called the CEO herd.
So they go to all the business roundtable meetings and read HBR and so they all consult with McKinsey, and so all these beliefs and norms and values get diffused in that way.
And what am I as a leader today? I'm an influencer, number one. I'm not directive anymore. God knows those heroic leaders, they're all gone. I'm an influencer, number one. I influence to build consensus because I want everybody to agree with what we're doing. I don't want people to be doing it because I say I want to do it. I'm humble because Jim Collins made humility one of the most important acts of leadership. I offer psychological safety so that everybody will state their views. I'm empathetic, and I'm transformative, which means I work with my senior team to help them achieve their goals. There are probably 3 or 4 other things that you're supposed to say as a leader, particularly a leader coming out of Harvard. But
no, wait. Do we? I mean, these shared norms, I mean, are they a result of any empirical analysis, right? Like, oh, this is how you're effective, or is it just that we want this to be true? Because we have some background, I don't know, legacy notion of what virtue is, and it lines up with that.
Well, Pfeffer and I say it's mostly what you want to be true. But if you ask these people, you ask Amy Edmondson, for instance, the guru of psychological safety, she will say that they have tons of empirical evidence. But the empirical evidence is all based on the following assumption: that when we're in an organization, we're aware that people are constantly making assessments of us. And because of those assessments that we're aware of, we are trying to look as good to as many different eyes as we can. And as we try to look good to as many different eyes as we can, we navigate. And we end up silent a lot in that navigation because we can't figure out how the assessment will play out. And if we're leaders and we realize that we're constantly being assessed by everybody, then we develop our skills as influencers. Then we try to reach consensus with people. One of the most important skills to develop as an influencer is empathy, and so on. But the empirical research starts with a kind of Goffman view that we're all there being assessed all the time, and what we're worried about is the different assessments that people have. Now, we know Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk aren't really worried about being assessed all the time. They're not that kind of leader. But most leaders are talked into believing that this is how it is as a leader. It's very easy to fall into it. And it's that kind of background understanding that permeates, by and large, HBR. Even the current HBR issue that's all about the courageous leader. If you look at the cover, when you look at the story, it's not getting you too far from that. It's all about taking these incremental steps so that you can show your courage, which is completely different from what I have in my book, which is where you're taking big steps, where you know there's big risks in in firing people or making investments that, if they go poorly, will redound on you, and you'll look both foolish and somehow evil.
But I mean, to be fair, I mean, isn't Amy Edmondson arguing that it's the job of the leader to create the psychological safety for the non-leaders,
Yes.
right? They're not the non-leaders aren't expected to have the kind of courage to just speak up, even though they might be ostracized,
Gregory,
right?
think about that. Isn't that terrible? Isn't that absolutely terrible? For me, this is one of the most astonishing. I can't think of this as anything other than immoral.
So you're saying it's because low expectations.
We set low expectations. We love the low expectations. I want to be in a place where everybody's courage is cultivated. I don't want to be in a place where it's assumed that I'm a coward who has to be urged and helped and told that if I say something stupid or wrong or harmful, that's okay, because we're in a safe space here.
But I mean, you cite Ray Dalio and
Yeah.
Bridgewater as an example of a place that's not like that.
Not at all.
But I mean, most people aren't cut out for that. I mean, I don't even think Nietzsche. The Nietzschean vision was something that he ever anticipated would be available to everybody.
You're at the edge. I'm at the edge of my Nietzsche scholarship. I go back and forth. I read different scholars each day. That was the Superman something that was just extremely separate from other people, or did he really deep down believe everybody should become a Superman? Was there always going to be a herd and super beings for Nietzsche? I have to say, I go back and forth, in all honesty, just as a matter of Nietzsche scholarship. I think when it comes to businesses, we should try to encourage courage. We should try to reward people that are courageous. If it turns out that we need a whole lot of people who are not able to exercise any kind of courage, I'm not sure that we should be going out of our way to find out what they're thinking. People can screw up their courage for a moment where they think that something's really important and then settle back. But if we organize our companies, unless we do it with the kind of brilliance Google has done, where people don't feel obliged to say it if they see it, we're going down an evil drain. How much safety is enough? Do you feel?
Yeah, but I mean, to be fair, right? I mean, when you're designing an organization with implied normativity, right, you don't want to have an organization that punishes people who exercise their courage, right?
No, never.
So I think that might be a point of agreement between you.
I think that there's a bunch of points of agreement. It is. I can give you the starkest disagreement. Amy Edmondson begins her book with the story of a nurse, and the nurse has gone to a conference and has sat in and seen a paper on a new drug that is very good to administer to infants born prematurely. And she comes back from the conference and she sees a doctor with two very premature twins, and he's not administering the drug. And she wonders to herself, should I say something? And she remembers a moment where the doctor berated a nurse for speaking up and saying something that he thought was stupid. The nurse didn't get fired, just berated. And the nurse said, it's not worth it. I'm not going to do it. Now, for me, Amy Edmondson, nothing happened. The premature babies did not die. So I would say the nurse got moral luck. That's an instance of moral luck. Certainly, if you were the parents of these twins, premature twins, and the nurse knew that there was a drug that could have been administered that might very well have saved their lives, but the nurse didn't say anything because she didn't want to be insulted by the doctor, you would feel really, probably, you're violently mistreated by that nurse. You would think that she had done a terrible wrong. My view is I want the nurse to speak up, but speaking up is not just blurting out whatever happens to come to mind. You have to compose what you're saying. You have to figure out how. You've got a proud doctor. There are lots of proud doctors. I remember I was doing work for a medical organization, and my consulting company came up with the view that the organization was arrogant. I said, how can we tell this to people? People don't like hearing that they're arrogant. I remember we screwed up our courage. We had to tell the truth. We said, you're arrogant. And they said, do you think this is the first time we as doctors have heard that we're arrogant? What are we going to do about it? Of course we're arrogant. We're doctors. So, I mean, in the medical profession, there is lots of that. How do you say it to them? That's the question. Not, do I have to have the doctors lose their arrogance, make me feel comfortable so I can say, well, at this conference, there was a paper that suggested you administer this drug. I mean, there are lots of ways to do it. You can ask, I just went to a conference. There was this whole thing on a drug. I'm sure they didn't tell me everything about it. What do you think of such and such a drug? Appeal to the arrogance of the man, but get your point across. That's the kind of culture that I try to help companies build. I think it's not that hard to build a company that cultivates courage when you realize that part of courage is realizing that you figure what you think is right, and then you compose a way for people to hear it.
So, I mean, you're saying that companies shape the people who interact with the company, right? And they can either be cultivating or discouraging, right, virtues in their employees and their customers.
I'm saying that that's what I believe they should be doing, and there are usually, unless it's a very, very unusual culture, a very, very unusual company, you'll be able to find employees that can deal with that shaping. Because it's the job of a manager constantly reshaping his or her employees. That's what you do as a manager. That's what you do all the way up in leadership. Now, obviously,
I know we normally, I mean, some people don't think this, but I think a lot of people in education think that that's our job, right? To shape the people who come through education. But even people who think that, they think that the job is done at graduation, right? And then it's just about matching, right? So then it's just about matching the people who have already been, the finished product with the environment, right? But you're saying that this development process continues onwards, and that when you're at a company, it's very similar in some ways to being in an educational environment. Your character development continues.
I'm saying that that's the way things are today. I'm not trying to say that's how it has always been in human history. I'm a kind of dinosaur. I think that we did much more character shaping back in the old days. And certain of us graduated from college relentless and hard driven, and certain of us graduated from college wanting easy lives. I mean, that was the whole point of reading the Iliad, where I went to school, Columbia, everybody had to read, and you had to have, was Achilles' choice the right choice, or should he become the shepherd? And you'd always have somebody in the class, boy, I've been working here for years. It's very hard. I like the shepherd. And other people were like, no, I want to be relentless. I want to be the warrior and die young. And you might change over the course of your life. But people came away, I think, 50 years ago, when I graduated college, more formed morally. I think there's more work that the businesses have to do now. But that, I could be wrong on that. It certainly is the case. If you're helping somebody run a business, and certainly if you're helping somebody turn a business into a masterpiece, that you're doing that shaping throughout the person's career. And the shaping goes into three ways. Number one, managers are shaping employees, and senior managers are shaping managers. Two, and this is, I think, really important, we're constantly shaping ourselves. We live in a postmodern world where the virtues that work today might not work tomorrow. And so I've run into, over the course of my career, a number of people who got into the top position, CEOs, by persistence and intelligence, and sometimes a sense of justice. And they run into teams that take advantage of that. Anytime something needs somebody who's really going to stick to it and work hard, pass it to the CEO. If it requires really a lot of intelligence, pass it to the CEO. If it requires a strong sense of justice, pass it to the CEO. I even was at a company where the senior management team and the next team down were taking Fridays off and passing things to the CEO who was working all weekend. So when people start taking advantage of your virtues, you have to switch the virtues that you're living out of. So you're doing self-cultivation as well as cultivating others. And the third thing is trying to set the standards for cultivation in your company as a whole, so that you don't have different managers cultivating people in different ways.
So, I mean, what are the consequences for leadership education, right? So at the top business schools, our leadership training is primarily grounded in social sciences, right?
Yes.
So, understanding organizational psychology, right? Understanding, motivation, understanding persuasion, right? So what's missing there? I mean, what would it mean to have a new type of leadership training? I mean, should we all be reading, Homer and Shakespeare, right? Instead of reading, Kahneman and Tversky?
You know my answer, I think. The answer is yes. It doesn't have to be exclusive. I certainly have room for favor. I certainly have room for a lot of the people in sociology, but you need that richer sense of human character. What happens when you read sociology today? Sociology is about people taken as wholes. Think of the famous Stanley Milgram experiment. What's the lesson we got from that? 66% of the people are going to follow authority. This experiment has been varied a number of times, and sometimes, do all your listeners know the Stanley Milgram?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, okay. Probably.
If it was somebody dressed up as a scientist and told them to electrocute people, and 70% of the people, those 66 to 70% to sometimes as high as 75% do the electrocution, even though it's not a real electrocution. What do we look at in the social sciences? We look at the 66%, the 75%. Who was it that said this is all wrong? It was a professor of literature. It was Stephen Marcus at Columbia who wrote, "This is just crazy." Why are we not looking at that 30%? Why are we not looking to see why they're different and how they're different? And this catches on. You can just turn to Malcolm Gladwell with outliers, and people are beginning to think about outliers now. But by and large, the social sciences are getting you to understand really well that average, that herd. And when it comes to understanding the outliers, you get the outliers defined in terms of the herd in any case. So the understanding is how they're different from, but not what they cultivated distinctively to get there, or at least not as much as you would get if you were to study Hamlet and ask how Hamlet became Hamlet and why he was Hamlet and what it was to become Hamlet or to be Hamlet.
Now, look, a lot of the stories that you tell in the book are really about founders. Okay. And, there's this whole debate about founders mode, right? And how it's different from conventional management. I mean, is masterpiece creation limited to founders? Can you inherit a company and convert it into a masterpiece?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the founders are the easiest cases to describe, and you can bring out most boldly there. I mean, the one person that we spend the most amount of time with in the book is the chapter on how Julia Robertson transformed Impellum. And she did not come in as the founder of Impellum at all. And in fact, she even her first company, which she transformed, she was the second in command. She was not the founder. And almost all the people I work with are not founders. However, the lessons that I bring to them and the lessons that are easiest to bring to them are the lessons of founders. For me, it starts down in your first management job. Your first management job, you are called upon to stretch people. In which directions are you going to stretch them and how? What are you standing for as the moral order of your department? To put it in simplest terms, are people going to work relentlessly? Are people going to work brilliantly? Go ahead.
And how much flex? I mean, can your moral order differ substantially from the moral order of the parent corporation? Is that how corporations change? Right? You know, you create some discordance between your unit and the bigger unit.
Okay, so exactly, you're right in tune with me. And so you can't be wildly different, but you can be discordant. But you have to make that discordance beautiful. Right. So if you have a company that is really focused on operational excellence, and you have your people working pretty well, but you want to focus a little bit more on imagination and brilliance, you can do it. And you start doing it little by little. And pretty soon, if you do it successfully, people are going to say, oh, he's creating a little bit of an island over there. And then they decide what they're going to do with it. We're going to incorporate the island into the culture, or is it okay to have an island? And sometimes it's okay to have an island, sometimes it's not, but they're generally not going to cut you off if you're producing decent results. But that's really a very strong leader who can do that. But within any corporate structure, when you start looking at it in terms of the virtues that are cultivated of people, there is elasticity. And if you're a manager who's got the moral imagination to see it, and most at least have the moral imagination to feel it, they can feel the heat when they're going too far one way or the other, then you have the flexibility to start exercising that. And for me, if you don't start exercising that, what I see is you get stuck. Because it's the people that do start exercising it, get people living in ways that they deeply believe in and feel strongly about, you're going to get a really nice feedback loop. They're going to know why they're rewarding people. Their rewards are going to be that much more substantial. They're going to get a organization where people are really working very, very hard and very much together. And that's going to take the managers to the next level and the next level and the next level. Even if it is like a manager I was just recently dealing with. Her virtue is total persistence and modesty. You would think, how can those be sufficient for management? Well, if those are your main virtues and you love that and you're going after that in your people and you're cultivating and getting them to do that, then the way they fit together, you'll produce an amazing team. You're not going to compete with Bezos with that team, but you're going to grow in your company. And she is going to have to, at some point, have a richer set of virtues. She's going to have a richer set of virtues. But just doing that at that level is important. I find most of my clients are working at the division level. And there certainly is enough room at the division level to be distinctive. One of my clients works in an industry that is really, I can say it's a gas distribution industry. In gas distribution, you really, really have to be concerned about safety. And most of the organizations pride themselves on safety and customer care. And that is hooking people up to gas, fixing their leaks very quickly if they get a leak, and doing that efficiently with friendliness. He thought innovation should be important. And so he took a division of this company and focused on that. I won't go into all the details, but he's got a huge number of robots going through pipes now to fix leaks. He's got cars that are robot gas sniffing cars driving all around the city. And he's made it successful within this overall company focused on safety and compliance. So yes, you don't have to be a founder. You got more flexibility if you are a founder, and the stuff you do can be underlined more easily when you write it up in a case.
Well, look, I mean, you have a lot of influences and a lot of folks that you reference in the book, including Nietzsche, as we mentioned, but you also reference Machiavelli. And, we've been talking about virtues, but, he talks about virtue, right? Like
Yes.
as a distinct capacity of leaders. So, what is that distinct capacity and how can it be cultivated?
Okay, I see it as a kind of ruthless effectiveness. And it's what translates for me in our world into courage. The difference between Machiavelli and me and my book is Machiavelli thought that all leaders had to be ruthlessly effective, and they did it as a matter of expedience. And his view was that any of what were considered then the more humanistic virtues, love, care, intelligence, cultivation, empathy, any of those depended on a state built with this kind of very, very tough effectiveness. I think something similar. I think that our virtues of justice, of kindness, customer love, of wisdom, and so forth require courage. Without them, without courage, you won't be able to exhibit those virtues at the time when you need to. And so I see a world much the same. I like Machiavelli because he was advising princes, and also in his other book, The Discourses, Democratic Commonwealths, to develop virtuous states that were managed effectively. And so that was what he wanted, but he saw them as sort of city-states, and that city-state organization is like the large business organizations that I work with today. But yes, I translate his virtue into courage, or we can call it operational courage if you want to make it more distinct, as opposed to intellectual courage or other forms of courage.
Well, our companies are definitely the new city states, and some of them are actually bigger and more powerful than some of our states out there. So, Charles, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. This book is called Leadership as Masterpiece Creation. Let's talk again soon.
Thank you, Gregory. Thank you very much.
Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.